From the West Barn podcast, Best of 2020, featuring Ian Thornley from Big Wreck in Thornley. Enjoy. Hey, it's Joe West from the West Barn with
Mike Shimshack.
Today, our guest is Ian Thornley from Big Wreck in Thornley. We're excited to have him on. Before we get started, we want to remind you to subscribe wherever you're listening. Tell a friend. Remember, we do have a video version of this podcast that lives on YouTube, but we're also available on all the streaming platforms for podcasts. Man, you know, I guess the best thing you can say about anybody in a career in the music business is that you find out about them from your friends that you kind of respect. You know, there's those movies that come out and they're blockbusters. And then there's those movies that come out and they're bigger 20 years later than they were when they came out even. And not to say that Big Wreck isn't huge. I mean, they've sold millions of records. But the way I heard about it, and I want to thank Chris Van Tassel and Sean Tubbs, I heard about the 2012 release of Albatross. I got that probably 3 summers ago. And when I heard it, it was one of those records that I was just like, I didn't really understand it, right? You know, you're kind of looking at your speakers as it's coming out of it, and you're like, there's nothing like this record. And it became the record I listened to nonstop for the next 3 months. And then I turned my son on to it, who's a guitar player at 16. And he was like, you could see it in his eyes that he just didn't understand. Like, it wasn't like anything he's ever heard. Which is like, how do you do that, right? You know, you're a musician, but how do you do that? And well, let me just say, welcome to the show. We're both huge fans.
Right.
Thanks for coming on. But, you know, it's like, I guess that's the question. You know, I was watching the Craig Garber interview that you did on Everyone Loves Guitar, which is a fantastic interview. Go watch that.
Yeah, he's great.
I was going to do this gag where I came on and I was going to confess that I was the guy that had put the YouTube comment on that he hated the way you inhaled. But I couldn't pull it off, man. I didn't want it to get weird too early.
He really ran with that one.
But anyway, we'll get to that. But you know, I guess what I really appreciated from that interview and what I really have struggled with throughout my career is making the decision to not sell out, but to go for big money or go to follow the crowd. But you had talked about how your greatest joy is listening back to your records, right? And this buzz that you get off of being able to make the records the way they should be made rather than following a trend or trying to not, I hate to use the word sell out because there's plenty of people that sell out that I love. But, you know, what is that? How hard was that decision for you? And what, you know, talk about that a little.
The easiest decision ever, to be honest. Yeah, I mean, it's just sort of do what comes naturally for me, because chasing that you know, that brass ring. As a student of music my whole life, I still am, and I mean, I love everything from the most complex music to the simplest music. I just love all music. And it all kind of hits me in different ways, but the feeling that I'll get from, you know, that whatever that feeling is something that I strive for. And I think we all do. And you want to be connected to something that has that. If you're lucky enough, like right time, right place, and all that. I think having gone through the first wave of the Big Wreck thing, where we were on Atlantic, and then that second record was like, you know, that classic Tom Petty line, the A&R man says, "I don't hear a single." Like, I lived that, and I was like, but this is like, the demos for that went on for 2 years, and I had 40 or 50 songs that were like the best thing I'd ever. I'm still sort of mining through some of that stuff today, because I don't, you know, as an aside, I don't really put a time on ideas. If it's a good idea that turns me on, it just hasn't been completed yet, or it's not quite ready, then I just put it on the shelf and I might look at it later. But yeah, that whole demo process, I was like, to me, this was some of the best music I'd heard that come out of me or us. And to hear them like be like, so right. What? Like, because the first record was demos, and they had bought the demos as they were. You know, I changed very little about the original demos. I think I had to redo a vocal on the O for first single because it was just too distorted. But the only reason I kept it was because I didn't have any lyrics for it. It was all scatting. It was just and they were like, I can't hear what you're saying there. So I had to go through and listen to it. And it was like in the room with all the guys. I was like, ooh, badabadi bado. Who's a dragon? Am I a dragon? Or who's that? What? So it was that kind of process of just nonsensical lyrics.
Yeah.
And then the chorus would open up to this normal vocal. But anyway,
well,
all that stuff was untouched. You know, it was uncompromised. It didn't have a stink on it. And then the second record, it just, you know, they just let us keep recording and keep going back. And, you know, once we got Dave Jordan on board, and, you know, he's an A-lister, so if he thinks you're great, then it's got to be great. So at the end of the day, nobody really knows what's gonna fly. And then with the after that sort of crashed and burned, we did the Thornley thing. And that was where every song we were swinging for the fences.
Well, before we get onto the Thornley thing, I wanted to, I almost imagine, it may not be true, but I suspect it's true. Like, you get this committee, there's a version of Big Wreck that people just pigeonhole immediately as Soundgarden, as rock and roll, sort of what was happening then. And it's like, I don't think they get the bottom of that iceberg, which is like, wait a minute. Yeah, there's a lot of what moves the speakers that feels like that. But the reality is this is a very different band. It felt like King's X. It felt like there was an extra gear there that was like progressive, you know, like really well thought out.
Very much so. I mean,
and I wonder if Atlantic got that. Did they get that?
No, God, no. No. That's and you know, I don't blame them. They're running a business. It's just, you know, I'm not slagging them. I consider myself lucky to still have a career. I think largely based on the fact that, you know, there's as much Yes and Genesis running through our veins as there is, you know, Zeppelin and The Who and all the stuff that fueled a Pearl Jam or a Soundgarden. It's the same stuff that fuels us. But I also, you know, growing up a keyboard player, I dug deep into a lot of prog and a lot of, you know, sort of classically flavored stuff, and even in my later years, some jazz flavored stuff. Not that I would ever call myself a jazzer.
Well, the other thing about that aspect,
it's all ripe for the picking. You know, it's all music.
There's a ton of stuff that when you listen through these records, you could tell who you were listening to, but it doesn't do that thing where you feel like it's a gag, where dude is doing dude. You know what I'm saying, right?
No,
so it's like
I do the deep dive for sure, and when I'm doing you know. Because you'll see in the comments section, and a lot of when somebody just grabs our song and puts it up on YouTube, I'm always a sucker, and you know my gal is like, Ian, don't. So I'll just start sifting through the comments and like, oh fuck, it's always just like, come on, it sounds like Mark Knopfler. I'm like, yeah, exactly, thank you. Like that's what I was going for. It sounds like Jimmy Page.
I don't think that's I think that those people I don't think that they're deep enough musically there's a version of that where you honor and you love people that got you into playing guitar, but then it's just filtered through you like anyone when you pick up a guitar after another dude, and it's like, why is it not the same even though we're playing the same stuff? You do a great job, like on All Is Fair. It's like that is a Zeppelin influenced groove, right?
Huge.
Or Locomotive. That's a Zeppelin, you know, but it doesn't feel like you're trying to do a Zeppelin thing. It's filtered through Big Wreck, which I really think is tough to do. It shows maturity as an artist.
When we're in pre-production or when we're like, you know, laying down basic tracks, there's always at least one song on the record that's like the Zeppelin track. You know?
Why not?
Or it's just called like Zepp this, Zepp that, and Locomotive was one. It was like that was the Zeppelin track until somebody said, "Dude, that's the single," and I was like, "All right."
Yeah, or Ghosts. You know, that reminds me of Sting.
Oh, big time, yeah.
Right.
I'm a huge Police guy and a huge Sting guy.
But it's like, how many guys in a genre are influenced by Zeppelin, but yet then they have all these other shades? You've got a really wide berth of influence when you play.
A lot of that is probably due to the fact that I've never, you know, I never got that brass ring, so I'm free to do whatever I want. you know, explore all the things that all the different avenues, all the types of music that I love. And I'm on a huge 80s kick right now. Like I'm on a huge
like who from the 80s?
But well, anything good. Like The Fix. If you ever listen to that record, that's tremendous. And it's, I mean, the obvious ones would be like the ones that we've already talked about. You know, even some of the Genesis stuff from the 80s. A lot of Peter Gabriel. I mean, I can dig through my phone and show you. It's just that, like, I just, as far as the gated drum sound, I'm like, I have a feeling that was Phil and Peter Gabriel, but more probably influenced by Phil. I know it was the two of them together with Hugh Padgham that came up with the noise. And it actually has nothing to do with reverb at all. It's just a mashed room compressor that they then gated. And it's actually the talkback from an SSL that they then just gated. And I've been messing with that sound on my own. And I'm like, it's just opened up this whole new world because no one's ever done it with like two like fire breathing Harley Davidson Les Pauls. And then that sound, like, how can I make that fit? You know, and then a lot of the sort of analog fat synthy sound, I love it. Like, why can't I have that in the middle and then have distorted bass in stereo? Like all these different things, you know, they turn me on. And then the more you work with them, it's just, you know, someone's going to say, it sounds like the 80s, like this sounds like Robert Palmer. Like,
well, I don't think anybody can deny the fact that these are like creations. Like, it reminds me of how I felt when the Beatles got into that era where they were doing things like, I heard this story about how they put a microphone in a prophylactic and put it down into like a jar full of water and sang around it. And they didn't use it. But the fact that they did that,
they tried it.
It made me think these guys were really pushing hard. And regardless of the little pieces that built it, and maybe the influence and the nods to people that you just really respect, at the end of the day, you build these things that I can't imagine as pictures. They're not, I'm a Nashville songwriter, but I grew up in the rock world. So did Mikey, you know, and it's like, so we came, I don't have any history in country. I love where country can be at times. Every once in a while, we still get a song on the radio that I really, really kills me. So I'm grateful for that. But as a songwriter, it's very formulaic. So I'm really appreciative when I see something that's completely out of formula. And your song's from a melodic. There's a lot of Mixolydian stuff in there that's like, I hadn't really thought of that. And it feels really influenced by just total exploration. There are no rules, as when we sit down in a Nashville room where it's like, oh, another 6-4-5 2 minor song, right?
Yeah. So I appreciate that. Thank you. I mean, it really does just come from that. I appreciate a good turn of phrase as much as the next person, but that's not like, that's usually the last thing I'll focus on when something really grabs me and it's brand new and I haven't heard it before. It's always the changes in the melody, and it's something that, okay, wait a minute, you know. And sometimes it's just the overall vibe, like the tapestry, the whatever that's the surrounding thing of the song. If it's a keyboard sound or if it's a drum sound or whatever, it's just like, oh, this is different. Because it's just, I've heard, especially, you know, I'm driving around a lot these days, and sometimes the radio is on, unfortunately, and I'm like, I just hear the same, like these people are using the same kick and snare samples and the same Axe Effects plugins, and it's, you know, to me, I'm like, well, if you're going to go into a studio and you have all these tools, isn't there just a little part of you that's like, well, what if, you know, that thing? You know, I once read that Jimmy Page just plugged right into the butt. Like, just try it. Just try it.
Right.
You know, and you might end up stumbling over something else. Like, still my favorite clean sounds are guitar, tube DI, will compress, use some delay, like some outboard delay unit. I'm just like, why is it so perfect? It's so much better than just I love a good clean Fender amp, but there's just something processed in just the right way, something artificial in just the right way, you know?
Yeah, I think there's so many variables when you're making a record that it's almost assuring or reassuring to someone to just sort of get 80% of the signal chain figured out and then try to do something that can be a hit-worthy something on top of it. It does sound like you do that. It sounds like anything's on the table, which reminds me.
Well, I mean, you have that's where pre-pro comes in. You know, we have our, my demos are pretty flushed out. And I mean, there's really no rules. Sometimes if they become too fleshed out, then the recording process becomes an exercise in mimicking. Well, let's do that. Let's do that tight tea towel, close mic drum sound for real now, as opposed to just BFD where you just turn everything down and you can do this and do that, and then it's like it's kind of there, but that might have a vibe to it.
How much of your demo stuff stays in the record? Do you build the tracks at the studio off your demos?
Yes and no. Sometimes, if something's pretty flushed out. I mean, on the last record, the demo process was pretty cool. We there's a studio where I had a writing room, but there's a studio downstairs, and that studio is I think it's gone. They're turning everything into condos in Toronto, so it's and I think that block finally got purchased, but. The guy who owns the building, Roberto, is a great jazz bass player and a friend of the family. He's like, yeah, just go in there and use it. So we basically, I just brought in my computer and a couple of toys, and we just kind of worked there and sort of rented a couple of mics. So Chuck would come in and I'd laid something down to a click, essentially, and then send it to Dave and Chuck. And then they would come in a week later, and we'd lay down the bass part. Like Dave would just plug in DI, and then we'd have 4 mics on the kit, and Chuck would we'd work out a part. And that was cool because I didn't build any drum parts or write any bass lines. We would do it as it was going down for the demo, but nothing really too flushed out, which I think helps with the spark when you get into the studio, because there's no pressure of trying to recreate or trying to top the demo. You're still doing it for the first time. So when you come up with some ding dong part that's going to be just for the chorus, and it's just like, wow, that opens it up, man. That kind of thing, you still get that. And I think that stuff gets captured on tape somehow. The excitement of discovering something, and I hate it when you discover something cool on a demo, because then you have to recreate it, and it just doesn't feel the same.
It shows maturity too. Sorry, Mikey, go ahead.
Are you producing these records?
Well, it's myself and Eric Ratz, so I guess co-producing. Him and I have a great sort of yin and yang. He really knows all the he knows the numbers on the hertz thing. I'm just like, that chirpy top end thing, kill it. Or he'll be like, that's the, actually, it's a 1K, and he'll know that stuff. And then as far as I'm like, there's a particular sound on a particular record that I'm trying to bounce off of here. And he'll 9 times out of 10, he'll know the record and the sound that I'm talking about. And then we both go start digging through stuff, looking for how to get that sound. If it's a pedal or if it's an amp or if it's a keyboard, whatever it is. So it's just a great thing. And he's also got a great sort of objective perspective on song form. When I like to sit on things, and I like to let them pan out. And then to me, the greatest changes always happen because of what happened before it. It's not what a great chorus. So it's a great chorus because it was set up great. Right. That's the way I feel about a lot of that stuff. And sometimes I wait too long on the setup, because they'll bore us get to the chorus thing. I'm just like, whatever, that's for the other, that's for the grown-ups, man. Let's have fun here.
Well, I love that every one of your records seems to they'll usually give you about 12 to 14 seconds for an intro, but not you guys. You're not afraid to go ahead and build a whole motif that's a minute. It sort of feels like a film. Yeah. It's starting.
I'm into that. I mean, call me old fashioned. I love the setup, and I love the what are these guys been up to for the last few years, and then it's just and then you just have a whole mood can be set just with noises, and then to have that morph into a song or whatever. It's sometimes that's an afterthought, but usually it's something I usually know what the beginning and the end of the album are going to look like. I never know what the single is going to be. That's not my game. Because I don't want to start focusing on one song over the other. Something's got to be way down the track before I'm just like, wait a second, like this one's the dark horse. I love this. Like I have songs on the last record. I'm like, that's got to be the best song on the record. And they're like, yeah, it's good. So, and what? I just have no idea, and I honestly don't care as long as it's all on the album. The unfortunate part is that a lot of people aren't going to hear it. You know, a lot of people don't go digging. They don't want to hear the last song on the record. I'm like, well, what if it's the best one?
Well, I would think with a band like yours, they probably dig a lot deeper than a normal record.
Yeah, in general, probably.
People come to these records knowing that there's a bunch of morsels all throughout them.
Maybe in the U.S., I would think probably more so than in Canada, because in Canada we get radio play, and in the U.S. we don't. Our fans in the U.S. are like, all right, they're still. I think they. And I'm not shitting on Canada by any stretch. I'm grateful for every person that listens to a song or comes to a show, of course. But it just, I think, because there's no radio play, that you're going to get a certain kind of muso fan. You know, you get radio play, and you know, we're just sort of a little more known up here. We'll get people coming to the shows because they're like, hey man, I want to hear Ghosts and Albatross and that song. They don't necessarily want to hear the 14-minute, you know, slow dirge, you know, tuned down to H. You know, they don't want to hear that, you know. And that's like, but I wanted to open the show with it. It's like, well, you kind of have to. There's a balance that takes place.
Well, see, this is the stuff that you wouldn't be able to do if you had a 10 million selling record. You know, you would get pressure from everyone that was trying to package it to say, hey, you can't tune to H. You know, you can't do it. You can't open the album with that. You can't have a 1.5-minute intro. You can't.
That's so 2008.
Yeah. You can't have all these melodies from the Pacific Rim in your song. You know, you can't do this, right?
I can't. I mean, I think, and that old saying is true. I think taste is the enemy of art, you know. But I also think like that goes along with fads, you know, every so often it seems to have either sped up so fast that the whole thing has exploded. So there's no real, I mean, everyone's free to yank from everyone else. But I've always sort of felt that way. If it's something I dig, like I love the whirly sound of Supertramp records. I love it doubled. Yeah. Why not? What's wrong with that?
Right.
And you know, I'm just sort of, it's all fair game to me. And even some of the really great sort of heavier stuff, which I don't tend to listen to very often. I can do a song or two and it's like, all right, stop yelling at me. But I can appreciate how the things are put together and the sounds and the way that riffs move air. I love that shit. And I love playing with it. But I loved, you know, then what if we just take a Supertramp / ABBA chorus and put it with this huge heavy riff? You know, can the vocal melody over the top staple all these things together?
Right.
If not, well, put that great change there, a great riff there, and let's start again, you know?
Yeah, that's super interesting. There's some stuff on the Thornley record I was listening to that felt that way to me. Like, I can't believe that chorus is going with that heavy intro and verse. Like, these things are not even in the same planet or, you know, ecosystem. But the vocal and the melody is what carries it through. Great melodies.
Yeah.
And your voice, I mean, come on, your voice is insane.
Thanks.
I mean, there's so much to talk about here that it's almost like, okay, his voice is totally blowing my hair back. The songs are from another planet. Sonically, I mean, the records are really good. Like, Albatross, that record, and that's Nick Raskulinek, right? And you guys.
Nick was sort of executive producing. You know, he was sort of producing from home. Okay. So Rats and I would be in the studio hacking away all week and then sort of send him where we were at with different things, and he would sort of make suggestions. I think he flew up towards the end. You know,
I mean, that
basically the one thing I remember from Nick when he flew up is that one of the things that was the back and forth that we had was he was like, there's a banjo in Wolves, and I had it pretty featured because I had mixed the banjo with a guitar part that had a whammy pedal, so it's very high, sort of ding-dongy thing, and they were playing in unison. And I was like, to me, that was the hook. It was such a unique sound. And he was like, yeah, you got to bring down the banjo, dude. You got to bring down the banjo. I was like, he's like, just bring it down. Like, I mean, tucked, like really tucked. Like the next level after this kind of tuck is off. That was, oh, dude. And you have no idea how hard it was for me to, like, you know, get that banjo part perfect. And like, it was a strain because it was like these weird shapes and I'm just sort of picking these, you know, oh, okay, let's try the chorus. You know.
So you did tuck it?
Oh, it's tucked. I mean, it's in the intro, and then it's kind of weird.
That also shows a ton of restraint as an artist to be so dug in on something that you love and you're so myopically focused on, and then you're able to work with people and be able to.
Well, I mean, you know, it's not compromise. It's just what you trust. I trust Nick. I trust his ears. I trust his enthusiasm. I trust his opinion. Same as Rats. And it's like, if I have something that I'm going to fight about, like Control, for instance, that was one where Nick was like, the bridge, the slam. He's like, that's your chorus. Like, the song should go in that direction. And Rats and I were always like, we thought that was the departure, and that the song's direction was, you got the top down and it's nighttime and you're driving through the desert vibe. We were going for that vibe. And then it just sort of, you know, we ended up kind of in both, because I mean, I went pretty deep with the bar and that midsection, and then reintroduced it after the last chorus before the long drive. But yeah, those kind of things. It's like it's got to be. It's about chemistry and having the right people in the room with you that you really trust. And I've said this before, and I will always say it, is like there's no room for ego shit when you're in the studio. The biggest ego in the room has to be the song. And it'll tell you, if you're listening, the song tells you what it wants. It tells you what's right. If it's still not, you just keep looking.
I think that's the kind of statement that as a younger me, I would have glossed over it and thought it was a cliche. But as I got older,
dude, it's patent.
Pardon me?
That's patented, copyrighted. Ian Thornley, that's me. That's mine. Garth Richardson tried to steal it. Garth tried to steal it after he did that record.
Well,
Garth tried to keep it.
But if you can really absorb that and recognize that you got to fight for the song in every turn, and if you do that, it will tell you what it wants to be. It will sort of demystify or decode as though it were a combination lock right in front of you. And people they get in the studio and they try to do something, and they're continually in this desperation mode where they're just anxiety and then just like paranoia, and they're screaming over top of what the song wants, right? And if you took anything away from this podcast as someone sort of starting down this road, it's like, have faith in the song. If the song is a good song, listen to it. It will slowly.
It'll tell you.
Yeah, don't talk over it. You know, there's a real wisdom in that I would have just would have went right over my head. You know,
I told you, one of the big things I learned along those lines early on was forcing things, because somebody told me, one of the first times I was ever in a studio, they're like, well, I was like, well, that change's not going to work with this part, like this, you know, this chorus doesn't work with that. He's like, and what he said was, you can make anything work with anything else if you play it like you mean it and play it like it was supposed to be there. And I've taken that to heart and thought about it a lot, because it's a fine line between that and forcing something.
Yeah.
When you're forcing something, I can hear that. I can hear that a mile away in my own work and in other people's too. I can hear it like, I really tried to smooth that edge, but it didn't work. You know, I can hear something that's been forced. And that's something that always makes me cringe. When I can hear myself having forced something, you know.
And you probably listen back, and those are killer records, and you have the disadvantage of knowing every nook and cranny of every old record. But I'm sure there's records that you listened to and thought, man, that felt a little forced, or you know, I mean, even though we look back at them and we love those records as the artist, you're probably happier now because you're just more mature as an artist.
Yeah, and I think going back to what you had originally asked, as far as making that turn or making that decision, and that did what happened with Albatross. There was a pointed, and I can remember the discussion with my then manager and record company A&R guy. It was all in-house, SRO Anthem. like the Rush family. And I'd already worked with Nick, and Nick and I were pushing to go in that direction on the previous Thornley record. And we're getting there was a tug of war between our ideology and make hits and make cash. And I was like, but there's a lot of different ways to make hits and make cash. Jack White's making a shit ton of money, and and his stuff is great, but there's no lock to the grid and drum samples, and come on, man. So, and Nick and I wanted to make something a little more organic and a little more off the beaten path. And by the time I'd gotten out of that record contract and I was just solely signed with Anthem, and the management was SRO, but in-house. And Andy was like, through Ray Daniels, Ian, just go in the studio, do what you want. I was like, all right, I'm going to need Eric Ratz, and I'm going to need this, blah, blah, blah. And it was just like, yeah, go, do your thing.
Yeah.
And just having that kind of faith in me was such a turn on. And of course, Nick was like, I want in. So we got Nick involved, and then we just sort of put the whole thing together. Very organically and quickly, and it was just I felt like I was being let out of a cage, like a bird was let out of a cage and just sort of flying around having a ball.
I'm sure that everybody has their favorite Big Wreck records, but that one felt like lightning in a bottle to me. Like I just felt like sonically, song wise, and in just the overall like artistry. Like when I listened to that record, I'm like, okay, this is a piece of art. This is something that they were able to capture.
There's a lot of different directions on that record when I look back,
Do you feel like do you have a record that you feel like you really nailed it, or is that record still out there?
It's still out there. I mean, when I look, of course, looking back, it's like, oh, we really got that aspect of it on that record. I think when I look back, I'm like, on Albatross, I'm like, we really nailed the versatility, in my opinion, just of what at least what it is that I dig, or what we dig, or things that we nailed authentically doing the things that we set out to do. Ghosts, I think, was in many respects is like, because there's a lot of heavy lifting on that record, and it's pretty meticulous. And I still sonically, I'm just like, when I listen to Ghosts, I'm like, God, that was great, because we were able to sort of thread the needle in so many different ways. There's so many tracks, and we got away with it. And then I think Grace Street was a departure in some ways, but it's a darker themed record. But when I listen to it, it's again like sonically, there's so many. And just the overall feel of it, it's just so different, and I adore it, and I adore Garth for helping pull that stuff out and into the light. And then of course, But for the Sun, I listen back in that one, I'm like, there's some really beautiful moments. I kind of hold them all in the same sort of boat. And the earlier Big Wreck, I kind of think of as differently, as a different group of guys, and we were focused on different things and going in different directions.
Right. And do you have someone that sort of follows these records and does a lot of the mixing on the records, or is it just whoever's working on the record?
Well, it's usually just Ratsy. On the Gray Street record, it was Randy. Randy Staub mixed it. And Andy Vendette mastered it. On the previous two, Rats mixed them, and Brian Big Bass Gardner did the mastering. So Eric did Albatross? Oh, yeah.
And is he, he's in the band, right?
Eric Rats? No.
Oh, okay. He's an engineer.
He's a shit hot producer up here.
Okay, no.
He won't even pick up my phone call right now. He's so busy, right?
Well, it was one of those records that was so stunning sonically, even on a little phone, that whenever I listened to it, it was just like flying out of my 2mm speaker. It was, how does this sound so big?
Yeah, a lot of that is Rats. So he really is a whiz with fitting the pieces of Lego that aren't supposed to fit together. He'll find a way with compression and EQ, and he knows tricks that
massive records.
They're so to me, they're so minute, and they said it's minutia, and it really isn't, because it's making the whole thing. It's like, I still want to hear these Jimmy Page parts poke out right here. And he's like, there's no fucking room. It's all packed. I'm like, well, isn't there a way? And he'll figure out a way to have him poke through just in that little part.
Yeah.
You know.
I was listening to a song this morning. It was just playing on my phone, and I was like, that has got to be one of the loudest guitar solos I've ever heard. It was a Big Wreck thing. But like, it made everything better. It's like sometimes when you turn guitars up past the point which a rational person would turn them up, somehow there's a miracle that happens and the drums sound better to me.
You'd be surprised. It's not me that does that either. I'm always like, I like certain things to poke out in a guitar solo. And often I find like I'm still working on that, getting a great guitar solo set, because on a stereo image of 2 speakers, it's just right. You put the headphones on, it's like, well, what happened? Where'd everything go? Or you know, if you listen through a different set of speakers that are listening in the car, and it's like, oh my God, it's ripping. So I'm still trying to figure out how the big boys do it, you know.
Well, dude, the guitar tones are out of control too. Like if you're going for these, when you get into these big guitar tones that we're hearing all these records, is there just sort of like a template, or are they different amps all the time? Are they
a lot of different stuff, but the majority is usually small amps. You'd be surprised. Like Fender Pro Junior. That's my secret sauce, man. I've gone through like 7 of them now because I keep burning them out. On each record, I burn out a couple. So, well, you can dress those up in a lot of different ways, but you just push it to the point where it's breaking up pretty good, and then put something in front of it to break it up even more, and then it becomes about what kind of thing you want, something tight or something loose and flubby, and then it's just about the playing. And you know, I have a theory that it's not choking the hell out of the mic. You know, we still use big, you know, the Sewers, and I have a few different amps that are like 100 watters, and we'll still use those and call them the bigs. But I find when you put those left and right in the mix, I don't hear them as much. You got to turn them so loud, so where they're eating so much bandwidth that it doesn't really make much sense. But they do provide a supporting role. And once things are mixed and mastered, it's like I might not hear the bigs, but they are making the chorus go like this. Yeah. But yeah, for the most part, it's small amps. I find that there's more of a character, and it gives the mic, or I don't know, to my ear anyway, it just gives you more to work with. You don't have to have it as loud to sound huge, you know.
Are you miking the speaker in the Pro Junior, or are you just using the wattage of the amp and putting it through a different cabinet type thing?
No, we did the speaker. I mean, depending on what the situation is, but we'll mic the front and the back, get a room. I'm a big fan of room sounds, man. I you know, that's especially for solo-y stuff, and you know, if something's a little more guitar centric, or you know, like the guitar dick, that guy, that sound, you know, I usually like the room. The room is really where you know, I'm just like, well, and then I'll just sort of walk around and move the room mic to where it's doing the thing.
Now, are you totally hip to the mics you're using on those cabs, or is that something you don't really spend?
I can pick them out of a lineup.
Right.
There's always a 57 in front. With the little amps, there'll be a 57 and maybe a 414, or you know, I'm just picking numbers now.
Yeah, I got you.
But no, I know that a 57 414 is pretty common. That's something that Rats is, you know, sort of industry standard is what we use. There's no trickery going on.
Yeah, we were just interviewing Tony Platt, who recorded and mixed Back in Black for AC/DC, and he told us a couple of details on making that record that literally, like, the whole record was a Steinberger bass, which was like not what you thought, right?
Yeah, it makes sense. It makes sense to me, because that stuff, like those, especially with bass, you know, there's no dead spots.
That's what he said. Yeah, and then you'll hear about all these guys who'll come into the studio and you're like, how'd you get that tone? He goes, oh, it's a Fender Champ. You know, it's this little thing that you didn't expect. And you're like, what? That? And here we are like listening to these records and loving them, and then going into the studio and trying to make them as we perceive they were made. You know, we're dragging out 412 and 812 cabinets and 100-watt heads, Mark II heads, and jumping the input. And next thing you find out is just this little, it's a Walkman, you know, or the Rockman. There's that Def Leppard story.
I use one of those. It's another neat trick for clean sound. Something that I still lean on is was much maligned lace sensor pickups that they made in the sort of late 80s. Love those things. They do something that, again, you know, in the mix, you're just like, that's why, you know, this is great. And they do a thing. It doesn't sound like Stevie Ray Vaughan or Mark Knopfler, but it does a thing that's almost artificial sounding, but it still just fits in where you need it, and it doesn't eat up too much space.
And what pickups do you love? Are you into high gain pickups? And
generally speaking, yeah.
Like what are some of the ones you use? I'm going for.
I'm just basically all sewer now. I don't think there's anything better. And I'm not, you know, because anytime I do one of these chats, if I'm talking about anything music related and John comes up or sewer comes up, I'm just like, well, it's the best that I've used, because it simply is. I don't think there's, and even Rats and other studio guys will tell you, it's just like, well, no, that's the best guitar sound I've ever heard. And it's just like, well, yeah, that's a G chord. You know, it's just all the stuff that they're making, and they wind their own pickups, and they're good. Like, I'm holding one now. That's pretty much what I go for. I use high gain pickups. I use them all. I use low gain, mid gain, high gain. It just depends what the part asks for. I was actually just thinking this morning. I was like, I'd love to make a record with like one amp, one guitar. That's cool. I don't think it'll ever happen. I'd love to try, you know.
Well, I see you got what you have there is 2 humbuckers and
a single in the middle, yeah.
But I imagine those are split coils, right?
These aren't split. These two guys are series parallel for these two guys. But there's auto splits on the 5-way. So when I go to position 2 to get that real quacky sound, this guy splits to just this part of the humbucker. And in position 4 there, it's this and this.
Okay.
So I can get, this is a Swiss Army knife.
You can get anything on that.
Yeah. Yeah, this is a SIG model. This is the latest iteration of the SIG model that Sewer's making. And it's honestly like, in the studio, it's still a workhorse. It's like, well, I really want a clean Strat sound. Just like position 2, there it is. And it's like, I'll put it up against a 65 Strat that I've got. I'll put it up against anything else. And I'm like, that kind of wins. If I want a particular, that artificially thing, I'll grab like a 91 Jeff Beck thing that I've got with the baseball back neck. But it's lace sensors. And it's sort of a different animal.
Right.
But this thing will do anything I need it to. I also have a guitar from him with his P90s in it. I'm just like, wow. Like that sees a lot of playing time as well. But and there's Meridian. There's a guy in Boston who made a bunch of guitars for me.
Oh, he makes that really giant guitar, right? What's it called?
There's I have a few of them now. And they're all very different. I think I have one here.
Something stack or flop or...
Yeah, flapjack.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's basically just a big slab of wood with a neck on it. And
is that like a baritone, or what is it? Scales the same?
25 and a half. Yeah, it's just and Dave, our bass player,
massive.
Hates it when I pull the black one out. He's like, please don't, because he kind of disappears. There's so much low end on the thing. So if need be, like for certain songs and certain things, it's like, well, it's just lacking some. We're just like look at each other and be like, we're pulling out the black flapjack. Pull it out. There it is.
That's funny. Yeah, I mean, it's sometimes you just want to play it, but you don't want to be discourteous to your bass player. But it's like there's that whole move where it's like you're reaching for something, you're going to bring pain to someone else on stage.
Yeah, it's fine in the studio, but on stage, it's like I can get close enough with any sewer.
And it's heavy, right? It's got to be.
It's not fun.
Yeah.
I think we had a guitar strap that was like this wide, like try to help me out, and I'm not a small dude either. I was like, oh. So he's made a bunch of them for me since the first one, but that first one just has like anything from sort of the 500 down. It's just redlined with that guitar.
Right.
I don't know why. I don't know. It's just sort of one of those lucky things.
Well, we've talked about that too with engineers and producers. It's like one man's mud is another man's warmth.
Yeah, I love the mud.
Isn't it something how
there's a way to use all that stuff, Yeah. I love Neil Young's guitar playing. I love Neil Young's guitar sounds as much as I love Guthrie Govin's, or any great sort of technician.
Right.
I just love music. I love all, like, and I find value in all of those things. I had a discussion with, I think it was Andy Wood, who's another just a phenomenal guy. He's another sewer guy. And we were talking about this because I'll go into the studio, or even with my live rig and the way this stuff is set up, I'm always like, I have so many different sounds that I kind of lean on, and it changes the way I play and the way I'll attack the strings and the way you squeeze them. And there's so many great guitar players who are just working on their sound. And like Scott Henderson's name came up, and it's like that guy's just been so steadily aiming towards this is and carving things out, and this is my sound. And it's like you hear one, that's that guy. I've never been lucky enough to be that guy. I've never, just like, this is my tone, this is the one I hear in my head. I'm like, oh, I want that Henderson tone, but I don't have the 20 years to spend to
you've got some inspiring tones.
I also want that Knopfler sound. I also want that weird Jimmy Page sound that sounds like it was mic'd through a tube. I also want that, I just kind of do my own version of this, sort of the Canadian version of all these different sounds.
You may not be getting the tones that you were influenced by, but like the beginning is of All Is Fair. I mean, that sounds like the bias on a tube is about to explode.
Yeah, that's just an Octavia thing.
It's insane.
You have an Octavia, and then you do one of these. You do like a double stop thing, with an Octavia on. There's a I don't know if it's a subharmonic series or whatever it's as you bend up, there's a, so I just did one down.
Well, there's some insane tones and a very wide palette of tones on these records. This is not like Stevie Ray Vaughan, who is insane and incredible, or B.B. King or Lindsey Buckingham. These aren't, where they have a tone that stays with them. You've got like a whole dictionary of tones that are on these records that are stellar tones.
Yeah, I don't know. I've always kind of dug it. It's half the thing for me. There's a lot of that sort of the edge, sort of ethos of being inspired by just dicking around with something until you find a sound. Whoa, what's that? And then next thing you know, like 20 minutes later, you've arranged a piece of music around this sound.
You can tell a lot of the riff-oriented stuff that you write is based around, I can just imagine. I see that you having a tone, and then it's like a great riff that works with that tone, and then it becomes this song,
Yeah, for sure. That happens all the time. It's not like I don't sit with an acoustic guitar and play cowboy chords, and I mean, I do that all the time, and try to write songs like that. I do it all the time. But I'm not just that kind of writer. If I'm just searching for a sound, and I stumble on something, that can be it. It's like, and that's usually, when the penny drops, it all kind of comes together pretty quickly. At least my favorite ones do. They always come together quick.
Right. Yeah. And you mentioned Andy Van Dett, who's a great friend of mine from New York. Sweet human. And I can remember him telling me he'd do a record for Rush or Porcupine Tree, but one of the records he actually made the call and told me it was a Big Wreck record.
Nice.
So it's like, it's got to be great for you that guys that are, guys that you respect and you look up to, and then they're like, you're their choice a lot of the times of what they want to talk about when they're working on records.
Yeah, and you don't get a lot of that. I don't feel a lot of that, but it's nice. It's nice when I hear it, because we sort of just been slugging away doing our thing, and it's nice to hear. It's better than a kick in the pants for sure.
Yeah.
Well, I find it interesting that you have all these different influences in your music that you're, as you said, like, you'll try to get a Jimmy Page tone. But what's ironic to me is you're incredibly influential to people. I don't know if you know that.
Yeah, I don't see that. I don't see that. Like,
you're now an influence to others. I find that really interesting. But I can personally attest that the amount of people I know that are huge fans of yours.
Really?
And, oh yeah, musicians too that make records, and like, so your thing now, which I find kind of cool.
Yeah, that's one of those things where they're like, "What's your sound yet?" I'm going for my sound. What do you think your sound? I'm like, I'm still looking for it. I'd love to have one, but I'm either wearing my Steve Morse hat or my Eric Johnson hat or my Jimmy Page hat, or. I
think you have more of a fingerprint than you think you do.
Yeah, I think so too.
It's nice to know. I choose not to look at it. This keeps me busy.
It's always good, we talk to people that are real successful, and I really love it when the guys stop and smell the roses every once in a while. And it's not about them stroking their own ego, but it's like, why, if we're going to do this music business thing, which is a soul robbing business at times, it really is nice to have somebody like me here and Mike tell you that. It's like, that's what I want for me. That's what I want for my son. That's what I want for people that I respect. It's like, you should take some solace in that. It's a really cool moment to realize that
it is
you're doing something super
special. It's nice to hear, especially from peers, and from every once in a while when you get a tip of the hat from. I mean, it does feel great, but I don't like to stay there smelling the roses too long, lest I kind of think I've figured something out, because what keeps me going is how do they do that? How do they it's not like, well, how did I do I'm like, well, that sold all of 20 copies, so let's figure this out,
Well, the best part of a musician is the one that can see himself through a lens where they've got to sort of re-look at the universe every time. You can't say we're going to build on this last thing. You got to do something different, and you guys do that. Mike, didn't you tell me you opened up for Big Wreck, your band?
We've been talking a lot about the studio stuff that Ian does, but Ian is also an unbelievable live performer. I had a band, Ian, we were based in Syracuse, New York. I'm from upstate New York, originally from Rochester. But I was living in Syracuse. We had a band that did very well regionally. We were great, and this is off the first record. I think the Oaf had come out and was, and we opened for you at a club in Syracuse, New York called the Lost Horizon. Which was, I
know that place. It was right across the parking lot from a strip club, right?
Right, yeah. It was kind of a shithole. But, a good rock, like legendary Syracuse rock and roll club. Yeah. So we went in there to open for you guys. And we were, we were kind of feeling ourselves a little bit at the time.
We were feeling pretty good.
We were kind of like a Matchbox 20, though. Like that kind of like pop rock kind of like, it's kind of light. It was fun. A lot of girls in the audience, but we opened for Big Wreck, and to this day, it was the biggest ass whomping we've ever gotten. I remember walking in for sound check. Your drummer had like a 26-inch kick drum or something.
Oh yeah.
And I don't even remember what you were playing. Matchless amps. Is that possible?
Yeah. No, I had a Matchless Super Chief.
And the sound coming off that stage was, I've never experienced anything like it. The two bands that I felt we left with our tail between our legs was the Big Wreck Show and Weezer.
Oh, nice.
Weezer was the first record. And we, I was like, this is out the record, we'll see how good they are live, like, oh my God, they were amazing.
Boom!
Yeah. Just as good. It was one of the most humbling experiences of my entire
life. What was the band's name again?
Johnny Vegas. You'll never remember it.
Okay.
But it was, that was, I literally posted on my Facebook page probably maybe a year ago, and it was just like, I posted a picture of you guys playing live. I was just like, there's two times in my life I can really feel like we had no business being in the same room. Was one of them.
After that first record, we were out. I think Brian and I sat down in more recent years, and we talked. I think we were out at one stretch for about 18 months. With home time sort of sprinkled throughout, but I didn't really have a home at the time. I would just sort of, crash in a hotel in whatever city we ended up in, and then we'd just start again. And it was a good 18 months of. So when you're live band and your whole thing, when your show, let's call it, is leathered up that much, it's you're going to carry a bit of not cockiness or confidence, but you just sort of know, you're just sort of looking at a different, you're looking at a different thing than I really want to, you know, which is like, you know, when you're on the road, and as the show gets more and more just muscle memory, then you start reaching for different things. And then that comes this way, and then you're reaching for, and that's just something that's bound to happen the more you do it. So I know on that run, we were probably a force to be reckoned with. As on any run, like at the end of But for the Sun, I would have put us up against anybody, like, because we've been out for 4 months slugging it out in the winter, when the best part of your day is the 2 hours that you're on stage, and you're looking so forward to it and just trying to improve and improve and improve and improve. And then, you know, during that 2 hours, you actually get to sit back and enjoy it a little bit. Yeah, it's just, when you put any band of like-minded musicians together for that amount of time, they're going to be a force to be reckoned with.
Yeah. Well, it's really cool to be able to have your mind blown every once in a while, and you've done that for both Mike and I. And there's two responses to that. One is to pack up and go back to Pittsburgh and try to get into the meatpacking business or the work for the United States Post Office. The other is to dig deeper and try to be better. And you've done that for a lot of people
too. I feel that way about, you know, everybody I listen to. You know, like there's so many things that I listen to that I just have my ass handed to me, and like I'm just like, it's not even the man, I wish I wrote that. It's just like I would never be able to write that. You know, like I just don't fucking read enough. It's usually the case. Like, I need to read more. It's like, but if I'm reading, I can't work on my wide stretch shredding, you know? Which nobody's going to care about it. Like, no one's ever going to listen to that shit.
I've got these meat hooks for hands. So like those, like trying to do any of that stuff is just like, it's not even on my agenda. I can't even book time to practice that stuff.
No. Well, it's just good for, you know, it's a good way to pass the time between being inspired.
Yeah. Well, hey, thank you so much for hanging out and being such you're a really approachable guy.
Hey, thanks, man. Thank you for having me on.
You're an incredible artist. Really appreciate and respect what you're doing. And thanks for doing something that you're doing for the love of it rather than chasing some formula and spitting out the same old, same old. Thank you for doing that and pushing us all to be better at what we're doing.
All right. Hey, this has been a very flattering and, you know.
Oh, we're fans.
Walk around the house now all bowed up and puffed out.
We're easy. We're fans. You had us at hello.
Right, that's awesome. Cheers. I really appreciate it, guys. I really do. I mean that.
That's it. So thank you so much. We're signing off. We'll see you next time from the West Barn.